When people ask where I'm from, I always say, it's a small two-story house at the bend where Linden Avenue pretends it's a straight line. It's not a town or a neighborhood so much as a smell. Lemon oil on the banister. It's the sweet rot of our plum tree after a storm. The damp wool of winter coats that never really dried once February settled in. If I had to draw a map of my childhood, it would be a floor plan of that house. With one room sketched darker than the rest, my room because that's where I kept the pieces of myself that never fit anywhere else. We weren't rich, but we did fine, at least for a while. My dad, Armand, was a mechanic who could make a dead engine apologize. My mom, Sarah, ran a home bakery out of our kitchen, swearing every time she dusted powdered sugar over the stove that one day she'd have a real shop with a chalkboard menu out front. They loved each other loudly and then quietly. The way married people do when groceries and bills and fatigues soak into their bones. When I was 7, my little brother Keon arrived with colicky cheeks and fists like tight little hearts. If I was the first draft, he was the polished copy handsomer, sunnier, easy in a way I never was. I'm not going to pretend I didn't love him. I adored him. I was the sort of older sister who learned to braid hair on a basketball net just so I could braid his when he asked. But if love were enough to make a family fair, we'd need fewer locks on our doors. It's strange, the moment you understand your family's gravity, what the center is, and where you orbit. I was maybe 10 when Dad forgot to pick me up from school because he was tuning Keon's violin for the 3rd grade assembly. You walked home before, Mom said, embarrassed when the vice principal called her. It's not that far. She was right. It wasn't. But I remember the wet snow in my socks and the dusk turning the houses into cardboard cutouts. And how the kitchen lights glowed butter yellow when I finally pushed open the back door. Where were you? I asked, trying to make my voice not sound as small as my cold fingers. Keon had a solo, Dad said, grinning as if the word solo was a kind of magic. He nailed it. You should have seen him. I would have, I said, if someone had told me about it. He kissed the top of my head, left a smudge of grease there. You'll catch the next one. Nor, me. The name means light. Funny how often people with bright names learn to live in long shadows. By high school, the pattern had a rhythm, like a song I could hum without thinking. Keon was the centerpiece. The sun with 24 houseplants of attention turned toward him, always watered, always in a sunny spot. I was useful, dependable as a paperweight. When he joined the varsity soccer team, my weekends became early morning rides and cooler packing. When he took AP classes, I tapped out flashcards and edited his essays. When he auditioned for the youth orchestra, I sat outside the practice room timing his scales. Even though the G-string whining for hours made me want to stuff tissues in my ears, he made it easy to center him. He was good at things. That's not a crime. But if you've never been the steady set of hands holding someone else's spotlight, let me tell you, even warm light can burn if you never step into it yourself. I wasn't bad at life either. I was the one who paid attention to the numbers. I knew how far we could stretch rent in February and where to stash the coupons Mom cut on the train. I knew how to make a Lou Gosht taste like Sunday on a Wednesday in March when it rained sideways. But the kinds of things I was good at didn't come with medals or applause. They were domestic alchemies, invisible until they broke when the toilet paper ran out or the electric bill went unpaid because someone forgot to mail. It and the lights snapped off mid-sentence. Thank God for you, Mom would say, hugging me with one arm because the other was always stirring, reaching, measuring. I don't know what I'd do without my girl. Maybe you remember Dad's work boots so he doesn't track oil through the living room, I'd say, and she'd laugh. I didn't go far after graduation. People expect you to love your hometown enough to leave it. I loved ours in a way that made staying feel like a kind of promise. I took classes at the community college, accounting, intro to business law, statistics, the kind of courses that smelled like pencil shavings and dry erase markers and made other people yawn. I loved them. I loved the way numbers told stories without lying outright. I worked part-time at the library in the afternoons and baked with Mom on weekends. Learning the math of flour and eggs, the small economies of frosting and ribboned boxes. If you're imagining a version of me that's saintly with patience, stop. I wasn't. I whined about Keon's muddy cleats just like any sister. I rolled my eyes when he practiced violin at 10 p.m. I hated how everyone always assumed I had time. Because responsible people are treated like they are made of spare hours. But there's whining and there's truth. And the truth was this. I believed the house was a living thing that knew my footsteps. My room was its heart. It wasn't big, my room. The ceilings were low enough that I could stick tape to them without standing on a stool. There was a narrow window with a crack along the bottom pane, and in winter I'd stuff wool around it to keep the drafts out. I painted the walls the color of sea glass the summer before senior year. Staying up too late with a fan spinning in the doorway and an old sheet draped over my bookshelf. I hung string lights and kept a jar of little treasures on the dresser, ticket stubs, a bead I found at the bus stop. A purple linked note my friend Lena folded into a tiny star that said, "You are not invisible." I kept more than souvenirs there. I kept paper. Papers, folders of them. Not because I'm a dragon who hoards. Because someone in a house like ours needs to know where things are. Birth certificates. Insurance cards. The letter from Grandma Roshni that smelled like mothballs and rose oil. The one that came 2 months before she died and said in looping, stubborn handwriting, "Make sure you keep the blue folder safe, Beta." Houses, like people, should be known by their names. It was a weird line, even for her. She was a poet on Wednesdays and a gambler on the rest. But the blue folder she'd left had the deed to the house we rented back when it had belonged to her sister. And then later some addendums from the landlord about repairs he'd agreed to. And then, well, I filed it. That's what I do. "You're like a little archivist," Dad said once, laughing as I scolded him for putting a W-2 in the same drawer as expired warranties. "I'll stop when you stop. Pretending receipts multiply on their own," I said, and tapped the corner of the blue folder where it sat snugly in my desk drawer. Life settled into a pattern that looked, from the outside, perfectly functional. Inside it felt like a table with one short leg shimmed with folded napkins. You can eat there. You can set a vase of tulips there. But if you lean wrong, everything tilts. Our tilt was always money. My parents never learned to fear interest rates the way I did. They'd shake off a late fee like lint. They were good, kind people who believed the next paycheck would arrive like sunrise. They also had a son with a sky-wide appetite. Keon is 21 now, 2 years younger than me. He was born with a kind of glossy sheen I'll never have handsome without trying. Hair that refuses to misbehave. A smile that looks like a promise. He's a music major at a private college that sends alum newsletters on paper thick as wedding invitations. He got in with scholarships and my parents' insistence that we'll manage. We always do. Managing meant refinancing the car and making the mortgage dance a jittery two-step. Managing meant the fridge sometimes had too much condiments and not enough food that could be chewed. People say golden children don't ask to be golden. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they learn that if they stand in a certain kind of light, everyone else will adjust their eyes. Don't misunderstand, me and my brother isn't a villain. He's just a person who has never had to pick the last cookie and break it in half for someone else. Spring tours is in May, he announced in January, skidding into the kitchen in his socks. The way he used to when he was 8 and Santa was rumored in the neighborhood. They're going to Vienna and Prague and maybe Venice depending on funding. Mom set down her spatula like a prop in a dream. Vienna, that's where Mozart lived, right? And Strauss, Dad added, proud in the way he always was when he knew trivia. He likes to flip through the famous quotes calendar and memorize something for the dinner table. I folded a stack of bakery boxes and reached for the tape. How much? Keon's grin slackened, only a little. Well, that's the thing. It's not covered in tuition. It's a separate fee. But it's once in a lifetime, Noor. Imagine me in the music variant. Imagine the acoustics. How much? I repeated. He looked at Dad, then Mom. Mom looked at the batter. Dad looked at me. 5,000, Keon said. For the bass, maybe a little more with airfare. I felt the numbers settle like a cement bag in my stomach. We're short on the mortgage this month, I said quietly. We paid the electric bill with a payment plan. I can try to get more. Ours at the shop, Mom said to Brightly, scraping the bowl. Wedding season is coming. People always want cake that looks like something impossible. Dad nodded. And I've got a guy bringing a Subaru in with a timing belt issue. That's good money. I looked at my brother. He wasn't cruel enough to say please out loud with his face. But it was there. That shining, expectant hope. The family's gravity tugged, and I felt myself lean. I'll see if the library can put me on Saturday mornings when the Storytime moms swarm, I heard myself say. A few extra hours each week adds up. Keon exhaled. You're the best. He kissed my cheek, battersweet, and trotted back out, humming something in 3/4 time. You didn't have to. Mom started, then stopped, then kissed my other cheek. Her hands smelled like vanilla and stress. This is where I admit something ugly. I knew what I was doing. I was trying to earn a slice of fairness by being good. If I could contribute a little more, maybe someone would notice I was tired. Maybe they'd say, you know what, Nur, take the nice chair for once. That's not how it works. Goodness, in a family like mine, is a sponge. It will soak until it drips and still be asked to mop one more spill. The weeks until midterm cost rehearsals ticked down in a glittering drip of posts on my brother's social media. Photos of sheet music and espressos captioned fuel. Backstage selfies with his conductor. Videos of him playing a solo that made comment sections filled with fire emojis and king and proud of you. I double-checked due dates for our bills. I packed extra cupcakes for Mom's Sunday delivery so she could charge a premium for a variety box. I picked up a few cash gigs bookkeeping for a neighbor's small landscaping business. Taxes for an elderly couple who tipped in loaves of bread and a kind. Now, don't let anyone take advantage of you, young lady. I laughed when they said it. But I rolled that line around in my mouth long after it should have dissolved. Late one night, I sat at my desk in my room with the string lights blinking slow as a breathing creature. I pulled open the top drawer. The blue folder winked. I took it out and set it on the desk, then didn't open it. I was not scheming. I'm not the scheming kind. I was cataloging the way you count the jars in a pantry when you can't sleep. This is ours. That's mine. This belongs to the world, and we only borrow it. The next morning, I came downstairs to find the three of them seated at the breakfast table in a strange tableau. Mom with her hands folded. Dad with his jaw tight. Keon with that odd wide-eyed innocence he saves for when he knows a conversation is about him but doesn't know if he's supposed to look grateful or guilty. I poured coffee and waited. We are a family of talkers. Silence is suspicious. We had an idea, Dad said, clearing his throat. Mom smiled, a smile stitched from scraps. Don't be upset, sweetheart. Just listen first. Keon sank further into his chair, which wasn't a good sign. He looks small on purpose when he suspects a storm. It works on most people. They want to pull him up and pet his hair. Okay, I said. The mug was warm in my hands. I thought about how if I pressed it against my cheek, it would leave a pink mark, like I'd been kissed. The house, Dad said. We're paying more than we should. I know, I said, and sipped. So we thought, just for a few months, maybe through summer, Mom said, darting a look at Keon, we could use your room differently. My stomach did that cement bag thing again. I set the mug down. Excuse me. Dad jumped in too fast. You know how the second bedroom at the front, the one that used to be the sewing room, is tiny but fits a bed? We could make that yours, cozy, like a little studio. And then your room, well, it's large. You've made it very nice. And it sits empty during the day. Empty. I repeated. I work 2 jobs. I go to school. I use my room in the morning and at night and in the half hours that keep me stitched together. It is not empty. We could rent it, he said, and the words came out like screws dropping onto tile. Short term. Or he hesitated. Or sell some larger pieces in it. The dresser. The bed frame. Just for a while. Sell, I said, and the room wobbled like a funhouse. For the tour, Mom said softly. Just enough to make sure Keon doesn't miss this chance. Keon's face tried to be neutral and failed. He looked hopeful and ashamed, and worse, entitled. A cocktail of expressions I recognized from every family where one child's dreams are the family hobby. I laughed. It wasn't the right laugh. It was a sound a person makes when they trip on the last stair in a dark theater. You're kidding. No, Dad said. We're not. We'd never do anything permanent. Mom rushed in. We just thought, look, we've run the math. With the dresser and bed frame and maybe the desk. The desk. I felt something drop inside me, like a coin down a well. My desk. It's solid oak. Nor Dad said, like he was admiring a car. We could get 200, maybe 3. I thought of the deep little nicks on its edges. The one shaped like the letter J because I'd slipped with a penknife trying to open stubborn packaging. I thought of the top drawer sliding back to reveal the blue folder snug as a secret. Keon finally spoke. I told them it was a bad idea. He said quickly, which was generous of him. I said you'd be mad. You did? I said, yeah, he said. But I mean, it is just furniture. Nor? And we can put a twin bed in the small room. I slept on a twin my whole childhood, and I'm fine. Your eye started, then closed my eyes. Of course, you're fine. I love you, my heart, Mom said. Using the pet name she saves for when she knows she is asking for forgiveness before the offense. We just needed to include you in the conversation. Including me in the conversation would have been asking before you posted the listing, I said, because I'd seen the open laptop on the counter when I walked in. A tab showing a blurred photo of my room, my string lights, my sea glass walls. Linden Avenue, room spacious, bright, close to transit. $800 Mo. Furnished. Mom's eyes widened. You weren't supposed to see that yet. I can be included without being consulted, I said flatly. We've established that at home and abroad. Dad's voice got stern, which is his defense when he knows he's lost the high ground. Don't be sarcastic, he said. This is a family decision. Right? I said. Like when you chose to refinance the car for Keon's tuition. Or when you decided my hours are expandable, but rent isn't. Stop it, Keon said, flushed. I didn't ask for any of that. You asked for Vienna, I said. And you'll get it. Because you always do. I learned a long time ago that there are 3 ways to fight in this family. Loudly, quietly, or by doing nothing at all. I stood up. I'm going to be late for class. Please don't be angry, Mom said, rising, reaching out as if to tame my sleeve. We aren't taking anything that matters. I looked at her, measured the distance between what she meant and what was true. Everything in my room matters, Mom, I said. And realized as I said it how childish it sounded, even though it wasn't childish at all. We'll talk after dinner, Dad said, in the tone of a foreman calling a lunch break. I went to class with a ticking in my chest that made it hard to listen to the professor explain variances. Numbers are usually soothing to me. Today, they marched. When I got home that evening, the house smelled like chicken curry and apology. Mom had made the Rada the way I liked, with too much mint. At the table, Keon chattered about Beethoven versus Brahms as if nothing sharp had happened that morning. My parents asked me about my exam prep. We all pretended. It was late when I went upstairs. I turned on the light and stood in my doorway for a moment like you do when you're trying to memorize a landscape. Your bus is leaving. Sea glass walls. String lights. The jar of treasures glowing like a tiny galaxy. The bed with the quilt Grandma had stitched. Tiny overlapping fans of teal and almond and rose. My desk waited, patient, the top smudged with erasable highlighter streaks. I opened the drawer just to prove to myself I still could. The blue folder nestled there, quiet as a sleeping cat. I did something then that I'm not proud of. Or maybe I am. I haven't decided yet. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the contents of the drawer. The blue folders cover with my grandmother's label maker tag house papers. The tidy stack of bank envelopes, the corner of my passport peeking under the stapler. Then I slid the folder out, opened it, and counted quickly, not reading, just confirming deed addendum, tax letter, transfer notice, a thin sheet with a notary stamp. I closed it and put it back, pushed the drawer shut until it clicked. Everything is in its place, I whispered. I didn't know yet why that comforted me. 2 days later, Auntie Heine came by with her daughters to drop off a pan. She stood in the kitchen, laughing too loudly, and told Mom about a friend who needed a room immediately. Beta, her internship is on our side of town and she's very tidy. Very polite, no boyfriends. Mom's eyes sparked. Send me her info, she said, almost giddy with relief. It's all happening quickly, Auntie said, patting my shoulder like I was the counter. That's how money comes fast, fast. That night I heard my parents' voices rise and fall behind their door. Snippets floated out only a few months. We'll buy Nor a better desk later. Kian's future, please. Sarah, don't you start. And then silence. The house held its breath. Houses do that. They become containers for whatever we can't say to each other. I woke to the sound of my own name. Nor, Dad stood in my doorway. He'd knocked, I guessed, and I hadn't heard. We need to make space this weekend. If you could start moving your things to the front room. Space? I repeated, sitting up. For the renter. For us, he said too quickly. For the plan? He rubbed his jaw. It's temporary. I nodded, of course. He softened just a fraction. You always understand. I didn't, not really. But I understood the choreography of our family well enough to dance it even when the song hurt my feet. I packed boxes with the mournful efficiency of someone folding away an old skin. I wrapped the jar of treasures in a scarf and put it at the top of a box labeled DESK. I stacked my textbooks like bricks. When I lifted the desk drawer, I paused, then slid the blue folder out and placed it under sweaters in my suitcase. Not because it was safer there, but because I couldn't bear the idea of anyone opening the drawer without seeing it look exactly right. In the front room, the twin beds sagged politely. It smelled faintly of mothballs, though Mom had opened the window. I set my boxes around the perimeter like sandbags against a flood. Cozy, Dad said, standing in the doorway, hands on hips. We'll add a lamp. It's fine, I said. The doorbell rang and Mom shouted, Could one of you get that? Kian bounded down the stairs and I followed because maybe my body was curious about who my room would belong to now. A girl stood on the stoop with a tote bag and a nervous smile. She had blunt bangs and the sort of shoes that make you think the wearer has never run for a bus. Hi, she said. I'm Elisa. I messaged about the room. Kian smiled, all charm. Welcome. Come in. It's right up the stairs. Mom made introductions in the hall like we were a sitcom family auditioning for a pilot. I stood back clutching the banister, the lemon oil biting my nose. Eliza took the steps like she didn't know stairs could be anything but hospitable. When she walked into my room and said, Oh wow, it's lovely, I felt something inside me go both numb and hot. Sea glass, she said, touching the wall. That's what this color is called, right? Yes, I said. My voice sounded ordinary. I hated it for that. The dresser is beautiful, she went on, admiring my grandmother's quilt draped over the bed. And the bed this is a full... Perfect. It's a fair price, Dad said. Utilities included. She looked at Kian, who was already telling her how close the bus stop was to the conservatory where he sometimes practiced. And your brother plays violin, she asked, smiling at him, as if the idea of talent was flattering to everyone in a room. Among other things, he said, and winked. I'll take it, she said. Just like that. 3 words. I'll take it. It's incredible how quickly your life can be spoken for by someone else's mouth. We shook hands. She said she'd transfer the first month and deposit that night. Mom hugged her. Dad clapped Kian on the shoulder as if he'd negotiated a peace treaty. I stood at the window and watched 2 starlings fight over the power line. After she left, Mom said, That was easy, see? And began humming as she pulled out a roll of plastic to cover the mattress just for moving day. Dad turned to me. Thank you, he said. And he meant it, and that almost made it worse. For what? I asked. For being steady, he said. You make things possible. I know, I said, as gently as I could. That's the problem. That night in the front room, I lay awake listening to the house talk about me in pipes and wind. I thought about a kid version of me, making forts of blankets, pretending the space between 2 chairs was a castle. I wondered at what age a house stops being a place you make and starts being a place that is made of you. I drifted in the uneasy way you drift when you're not sure your things are safe across the hall. I dreamed I was standing in my old room while strangers passed through, pointing at the walls, saying, "We'll take this, and this, and this." In the dream, I kept trying to hand them a blue folder, but they smiled and shook their heads. "That's part of the house," they kept saying, "not part of you." I woke up with my heart galloping. The air smelled like morning toast. From the hallway, I heard Dad's voice, then a stranger's, then the scrape of wood. I threw on a hoodie and stepped into the hall. Two men I'd never seen before were in my room, lifting my dresser. "Careful," Mom said, hovering. "It's heavy." "What is this?" I asked. Khan sobbed from the thrift coop. Dad said, pointing like I'd brought a field trip home. "He's buying the dresser and bed frame this morning. They have a truck." I stared at him. "Already." "Eliza will be here tomorrow," Mom said. "We want everything set." "Everything," I repeated. Keon appeared behind me, hair ridiculous and perfect. He looked sharp for someone who always claims not to notice mirrors. "Hey," he whispered, nudging me. "It'll be okay. I'll help you build a new desk from IKEA. Those are cool minimalist." I looked at him and saw a fourth grader in a too-long shirt, playing Twinkle Twinkle while I clapped offbeat to encourage him. I saw the same boy at 17 crying when his girlfriend left for a different college, and me making hot chocolate and telling him the world was bigger than any one door. I loved him. God, I hated him. My heart did both without checking in. The men carried my dresser down the stairs like pallbearers. The bed frame followed. "We'll wrap the desk," Dad said, as if that were kindness. The patient light in my room faded by a shade. I went to the front room. I sat on the twin bed that wasn't mine and stared at my suitcase. The top zipper gaped, a little silver tooth missing. The corner of the blue folder poked out beneath sweaters. I pressed my palm flat on it like it might try to fly away. "Everything is in its place," I whispered again. But everything wasn't. The house was tilting. And as we all know, things slide when the angle gets steep enough. I just didn't know yet what exactly would slide door what, tucked deep behind a desk drawer. Would refuse to budge no matter how hard anyone pushed. I always thought humiliation was loud. A slap in public. A cruel laugh at your expense. A spilled tray in a cafeteria. But the worst kind of humiliation, the kind that gnaws you hollow, is quieter. It's the sound of your life being boxed up in silence, of strangers walking through the middle of your story while you stand at the edges, trying to look smaller so no one notices you're bleeding. That weekend, my humiliation arrived in boxes, plastic covers, and the sound of unfamiliar footsteps echoing in what used to be my sanctuary. The morning Eliza officially moved in, the house smelled of disinfectant instead of cinnamon rolls. Mom had mopped twice. Dad had hammered a loose nail back into the banister like the whole house was auditioning. Keon hovered in the kitchen, sipping orange juice as though this was just another Sunday. I stood in the front room, tugging at my sweater sleeves, staring at the little twin bed where I now lived. The boxes stacked against the wall looked less like belongings and more like evidence. If someone walked in, they'd think I was renting this room by the week, a guest in my own house. "Eliza's here," Mom called from downstairs, her voice too cheerful, too sharp at the edges. I didn't want to, but I walked out and leaned over the banister. She stood at the door with her tote bag and a rolling suitcase, smiling as if she'd arrived at a boutique hotel. Dad shook her hand, already using his friendly landlord voice. Keon bounded forward, carrying her suitcase upstairs, laughing when she said, "Oh, you don't have to. You'll love it," he told her. The light in the mornings is incredible. The light? My light. I followed slowly. When I reached the doorway of what used to be my room, Eliza was turning in a circle like a delighted child. "It's even nicer in person," she said. She ran her hand along the windowsill, then plopped onto my bed. "So comfy." Perfect. I stood there, arms crossed like an intruder. No one introduced me as the person who had painted those walls, who had taped wool along that drafty window, who had kept that bed warm through winters when the heater sputtered. To Eliza, I was just someone's sister. Background noise. Dad clapped his hands together. We'll leave you to settle in. Dinner at 6, if you want to join us. Thanks. She chirped, already unpacking her laptop and plugging in her phone. As we filed out, Keon whispered, "See? She's nice. It won't be that bad." I didn't answer. Because what I wanted to say, it's not about her being nice. It's about me not existing felt too raw to survive in the open air. That night, Eliza joined us at the table. Mom had made chicken biryani, the dish she always brought out for guests. It's the one that required extra saffron we couldn't usually afford. The table looked almost festive. "Smells amazing," Elisa said, sliding into the chair that used to be mine. My chair. She smiled at me politely across the table. And I nodded back like a stranger meeting a stranger. "This is incredible," she said after the first bite. "You're such a good cook, Mrs. Khan." "Call me Sierra," Mom beamed. "She's opening a bakery soon," Keon added proudly, as if it were fact instead of a dream stretched thinner every year. "And you're studying music, right?" Eliza asked him, tilting her head. "I play piano a little just for fun." "Oh, really?" Keon leaned forward, already glowing. "We should jam sometime." I watched the conversation bounce back and forth like a shuttlecock, light and easy. Mom asked about Eliza's internship. Dad asked about her commute. Keon told her about his orchestra. Not once did anyone ask about my day, my classes, my job. I might as well have been the decorative salt shaker between the napkins. At one point, Eliza gestured toward me. "And what about you?" I straightened, grateful someone remembered I had a voice. "I'm studying accounting at the community college." "That's useful," she said politely, then turned back to Keon. "So, what's it like traveling with the orchestra?" The heat crawled up my neck. "Useful, like a screwdriver, like a dishcloth. Not impressive, not important, just useful." The days blurred into a new normal where I was a tenant in my own home. Eliza's laughter echoed through the walls of my old room while I studied in my cramped front space. Sometimes I'd hear her and Keon playing music together, violin and piano weaving through the house like a duet. I'd never been invited to join. One evening I walked past my old doorway and froze. Eliza had hung fairy lights over the headboard. Why my lights? She'd plugged them in and they glowed softly against the sea glass walls I'd painted with my own hands. "Oh, Nor," she said, spotting me. "I hope you don't mind, I've found these lights in the closet. They're so cute." "They're mine," I said flatly. Her smile faltered. "Oh," I thought, sorry. "Do you want them back?" Before I could answer, Dad appeared behind me. "They're fine where they are," he said briskly. "Eliza's making the space feel like home. Isn't that nice?" Home, he'd called my room her home. I wanted to scream, but instead I just nodded and walked away, chewing on my own silence until it tasted like metal. The final blow came at a family dinner 2 weeks later. Auntie Hein had organized a big gathering, cousins, uncles, neighbors, all crammed into her living room with plastic chairs and steaming trays of food. The kind of event where gossip bloomed faster than the fried samosas disappeared. I wore my nicest kurta, the one Lena had given me, hoping I'd feel less invisible. I sat with my cousins, listening half-heartedly to their chatter about jobs and travel. Across the room, I heard Auntie say loudly to Mom, "So I hear you rented out the big room." Smart move. These days you can make good money from tenants. I froze, heads turned. My cousin's eyebrows shot up. "Wait," one of them whispered, "they rented out your room?" The laughter started small and Uncle chuckling, a cousin whispering something behind her hand. Then Auntie Hein, never one to miss a chance to stir the pot, added, "Can you imagine?" Poor Nor squeezed into that tiny front room while the stranger enjoys her sea glass palace. The room erupted in laughter. Real ugly laughter. I felt the heat burn my face. "It's temporary," I managed to say, my voice cracking. "Oh, come on, Nor," one cousin smirked. "You're always so serious. At least your sacrifice is funding Mozart Jr.'s big vacation, right?" He gestured at Keon, who raised his glass sheepishly while the crowd applauded. Sacrifice. As if I'd offered myself willingly. As if I'd said, Yes, take my space. Take my dignity so my brother can play his violin in Vienna. I looked at my parents, waiting for them to step in to defend me, to say this wasn't what it looked like. But Mom just smiled tightly. Dad muttered, "It's for the family." The humiliation swelled in my chest until I couldn't breathe. I excused myself, stumbling to the bathroom, locking the door behind me. I stared at my reflection, cheeks blotchy, eyes wet. I whispered, "You don't matter to them." "You never did." The laughter still echoed from the living room. My humiliation wasn't just private anymore. It was communal entertainment. That night, back at home, I lay awake in the front room listening to Eliza laugh at one of Keon's jokes through the wall. I pressed my face into my pillow, the taste of humiliation still raw. I realized then it wasn't just about the room or the furniture or the stranger sleeping in my bed. It was about being erased over and over until even my family could laugh about it at a party. But they had forgotten one detail, one thing no one else remembered. The blue folder, tucked safely under my sweaters in the suitcase at the foot of my bed. The house wasn't just walls and paint and furniture. It had a name, and that name was on the papers in that folder. They thought they'd sold my room for my brother's vacation, but they had no idea what they'd really put at stake. And soon, very soon, they were going to find out. People talk about one detail, like it's a ribbon you notice at the last second on an otherwise finished gift. They don't tell you that the detail is more like a thread, and when you tug on it, the whole sweater of your life starts to unravel in somehow. That unraveling is the exact thing that saves you from freezing. 2 nights after that family dinner at Auntie Henna's after, the laughing and the clapping and the word sacrifice tossed like confetti, sat cross-legged on the twin bed in the front room, my suitcase open like a mouth. I'd taken to sleeping with my hand on the sweaters where I'd hidden the blue folder. It's like a dragon with the one coin that still mattered in a looted cave. I slid the folder out. The plastic was scuffed and a little cloudy. The label my grandmother had punched with her old label maker slightly peeling at the corner. House papers beneath it. Faintly, another label showed through. Older, half-torn names, houses like people. Should be known by their names, Grandma had written in that last letter. She had a talent for making strange sentences into spells. I opened the folder and let the papers smell dust ink, a ghost of rose oil fill the little room. The top layer was familiar. The deed from when the house transferred from Grandma's sister to our parents. A couple of repair addendums signed by a landlord long dead. Tax letters addressed to the house like it was a person who owed the city respect. I sifted past them, stopping when I hit documents I didn't quite recognize. A notary seal winked up at me like a coin at the bottom of a fountain. "Okay," I whispered to no one. "Tell me your names." The first surprise was a promissory note dated 13 years ago, the year I started high school. The year the roof leaked all winter like the sky had sprung a permanent leak over our kitchen. It was signed by my parents in their nervous grown-up signatures and by my grandmother in her extravagant cursive. Borrower, Arman and Sarah Khan. Lender Roshni Patel. The amount made me swallow. $45,000 to be repaid over 8 years with a small interest, amended twice. For roof repairs and mortgage arrears, it said in ballpoint pen. Grandma's handwriting dancing in the margin like she couldn't help correcting the formality with a real sentence. Attached, clipped at the corner with one of Grandma's avocado green paper clips, was a deed of trust. I'm not a lawyer, but numbers and forms are my native language. I skimmed. Beneficiary, Roshni Patel. Trustee, a local title company I recognized. Collateral. The property commonly known as 427 Linden Abbey Our House. There was a recording stamp, a book, and page number from the county recorder's office. I felt my pulse in my mouth. This wasn't news Grandma had floated the family more than once. But the next page made my scalp prickle. A rider. It was titled in a stubborn typewriter font, Occupancy and Use Covenant. What? I breathed. I read. And then I read again, slower. Because sometimes your eyes know what your mouth isn't ready to say. As additional and independent consideration for the loan evidenced by the note and secured by the deed of trust. Borrower agrees to the following occupancy and use terms. 1. The bedroom located on the southwest corner of the T. Second floor hereinafter, the reserved room, shall be reserved for the exclusive use and quiet enjoyment of borrower's daughter Noor Khandab until the earliest of her 30th birthday. B. Her written waiver. Or C. Her permanent relocation for a period exceeding 180 consecutive days. 2. Borrower shall not lease, rent, license, or otherwise grant possession of the reserved room to any person other than Noor Khan, without the written consent of the beneficiary or her successor in interest. 3. Violation of this covenant shall constitute a default under the note and deed of trust at the beneficiary's sole election, permitting acceleration and foreclosure remedies as provided by law. 4. This covenant shall run with the land and bind borrowers, successors, and assigns. At the bottom, signatures. Mom and Dad's, Grandma's, a notary block with a seal, like a wedding cake. And in blue ink, a name I did not expect, successor beneficiary, Noor Khan, my name nominated upon Grandma's death. My hands shook. I wasn't imagining the blue folder's importance. It was the anchor our house had been pretending not to need. I kept going, paper crackling like leaves. There was a memorandum of trust for Grandma's small revocable trust, where, right under the distribution list that gave my mom her bangles and my uncle a watch he'd always coveted, was a line that said, "Assignment of note and deed of trust to successor beneficiary, Noor Khan." Another recording stamp. Another set of numbers. Houses, like people, should be known by their names, I murmured. And this time the sentence made sense. The house had a name, and so did the room. Reserved room, southwest corner. My room. I leaned back against the cold wall. My mind did that thing it does with numbers building a structure where there had been a heap. The covenant wasn't just furniture-level sentimental. It was tied to a loan secured by the house. If they broke it, they had broken it, the lender, or her successor could call the note due. The lender was dead. The successor was not. She had a name. It was mine. I laughed once, quietly, like someone who hears a punchline outside a church and knows better than to cackle. My first instinct was to storm into my parents' room, fling the papers onto their bed, and say, "Explain this." But the humiliation at Auntie's, the way laughter filled a room at my expense, had taught me something. Timing is a kind of power. And Grandma, gambler that she was when it came to life's small risks, had left me more than paper sheet, left me a strategy. Know the names, know the order, know the rules. So I made a plan that was the opposite of how my family did things. I moved slowly. The next day on my lunch break from the library, I walked to the county building. I felt nervous, like I'd cheated and was going to get caught, even though the cheating was just reading what was mine to read. The recorder's office smelled like toner and air conditioning and the long ache of bureaucracy. A woman with a name tag that read Felicia Recorder's Office looked up at me over square glasses. "Hi," I said. I was wondering if I could look up a recorded document. I have the book and page number. "Sure thing," she said, the way people do when you speak the language of their day. "What are you looking for?" "A deed of trust recorded about 13 years ago, plus a rider, and a memorandum of trust recorded a little later." She tapped at a keyboard. "Parcel number." I handed her the scrap of paper on which I'd written the numbers from the stamps in the folder. She glanced from me to the screen and back. "You want copies?" "Yes." My voice didn't shake. It surprised me. While the printer made its comforting animal grumble, Felicia squinted at the screen. "Roshni Patel," she read, pronouncing my grandmother's name with care. "We don't see many riders like this. Unusual, but it's recorded. It's real." Something in my bones unlocked, like a door I'd been pushing, not realizing it pulled. "So, it's enforceable." She shrugged, the knowledgeable kind. "I can't give legal advice. But if it's recorded and not released or reconveyed, it's part of the chain. Anyone doing title would see it." "Anyone doing title?" I repeated. "Anyone after me?" Anyone who tried to sell this house without my say would find my name like a watermark through the paper. I paid my $3 per page, heartily grateful for 1980s fee schedules that still survived in small government offices, and walked out into sunlight that felt 2 degrees friendlier. At the library, I didn't shelve the returned books during my afternoon shift. I asked Carla, my manager, if I could use the database room for an hour during my break tomorrow. Of course, she said, peering at my face. You look like you're about to write a manifesto. Something like that, I said, and meant it. That night, back home, I cooked dinner. Nothing fancy, just lentils with fried onions and rice. Mom came in, surprised. You don't have to do that, she said. Consider it rent, I said, and watched guilt flicker across her face like a moth. At the table, I listened to Keon practice jokes he'd tell donors at the orchestra fundraiser. Yes, there was a fundraiser, now 2 because 5,000 had become 6, and then some because fees breed like rabbits. He asked if he could use the good car for a week to drive to rehearsals every night. Dad said yes before he'd finished the question. Mom reminded him to take leftovers. I asked if anyone had checked the tire pressure. Nor, Dad said, half annoyed, half affectionate. Always with the details. Always with the details, I thought, and almost choked on a laugh. If only you knew which detail I was holding with both hands. That night, I knocked on the door of my old room, Eliza's room. Now, she opened it with a smile that made me feel suddenly like a bully. Hey, she said. Come in. I stepped into the space that had been my sanctuary. It smelled like her lotion and my paint. She'd added a plant on the windowsill pothos, easy, forgiving. My string lights glowed over the bed like a small constellation that no longer knew my name. I wanted to ask you something, I said. She straightened. Is everything okay? Mostly, I said. I touched the edge of my desk, the desk which they hadn't sold yet because the cope guy needed a second truck, Dad had said, apologetic. You didn't know when you moved in? About me? About the room? She flushed. I kind of did, she admitted. Your mom said it was your old room, and I felt weird. But she said you were thrilled about the extra cash for your brother's tour. Thrilled, I repeated, and heard how brittle the words sounded in my mouth. She bit her lip. Look, I don't want to be in the middle of a family thing. If you want me to, no, I said quickly. I didn't want her to leave out of pity, only to have my parents blame me for ruining Keon's once-in-a-lifetime. You've paid. You've signed. It isn't your fault. She relaxed, a little. Okay. Her eyes flicked to the papers in my hand. I hadn't realized I'd been clutching the copies from the recorder's office like a talisman. What's that? She asked. Proof, I said. And a map. A map to what? Justice, I almost said, and then felt ridiculous. To the truth, I settled on. I know you work at Belson and Greeley. She blinked. How did you? You told Mom at dinner. You're interning in their compliance department. Oh, she laughed. Right? Sorry. Sometimes I forget what I say to whom. She tilted her head. Do you? Need legal advice. I need someone to not tell my parents while I find mine, I said. And maybe to tell me if I'm reading this right? She chewed the inside of her cheek, then nodded. I can't officially advise, but I can read, and I can keep my mouth shut. I handed her the writer and the assignment. She perched on the edge of the bed and read, lips moving the way mine do when I do math. Her eyes widened. This is recorded? Yes. She looked up at me with something like respect. Your grandmother was? Wow, she was. So they can't rent this room without your consent, she said slowly, then frowned. And if they do, you can call the loan due, like foreclose. I don't want to blow up the house, I said, though a dark, petty part of me liked the phrase. I want them to stop pretending I'm furniture. I want them to know I could. Eliza nodded, understanding as quickly as she'd learned the bus schedule. And you want to time it? I want to time it, I agreed. We sat in my room together, hers and mine, like two people who both knew which lines on a map mattered. She didn't apologize again. I didn't ask her to. Somehow that felt like the beginning of a truce neither of us had earned yet, but both needed. The next afternoon, in the library's database room, I pulled up every free legal resource our county had. I read about deeds of trust, secured interests, covenants that run with the land. I read case summaries until my eyes crossed. I learned phrases that tasted like iron: quiet enjoyment, exclusive possession, notice to quit. I learned that a recorded covenant is notice to the world that successors and assigns meant everyone after. I printed out a few cases and highlighted not because I needed to, but because the highlight pen in my hand felt like a handle on a machine that had always crushed me. I called Lena, my friend who once folded a note that said, "You are not invisible. Can I run something by you?" "You can run everything by me," she said without missing a beat. "You want me to come over?" "Tomorrow," I said. After the fundraiser." "Ah," she said. "The Vienna Fest?" "Don't call it that." I laughed, then sighed. "Call me if you hear a scream." "I'll bring earplugs," she promised. At home that evening, Eliza was at the piano in the living room playing something gentle while Keon tuned in the corner. Mom fluttered with trays of canapes like we lived in a house that could afford trays. Dad adjusted the thermostat to exactly 72, his version of setting the stage. "Donors," Keon said, grinning at me around the chin rest of his violin. "Not fancy donors. Just like people who want to support the arts." He waggled his eyebrows. "You're going to love Mrs. Patel. She used to run a recital series. She knows everyone." I stared at him. Patel. The name came at me like a bell rung near my ear. Not my grandmother, different family, different world, but still. It felt like a ghost tapping a spoon against a glass. "Great," I said. "Everyone who knows everyone always loves me." He missed the sarcasm or ignored it. "Just be yourself." "Which one?" I muttered. But he was already absorbed in his bow. I went upstairs to the front room and changed into a dress that made me feel like a person with boundaries. It was navy blue, simple, with sleeves that said professional and a neckline that said, "Don't underestimate me." I tucked the copies from the recorder's office into a plain folder and slid it into a canvas tote. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a woman who had been humiliated in public and had decided, quietly, to set a stage of her own. Downstairs, people arrived with wine and the kind of laughter that sticks to ceilings. Auntie Hine came, of course, with a tray of jalebi and a comment about how good it was to see everyone pulling together for Keon's future. She pinched my cheek, actually pinched it, and said, "And look, our nurse still in the little room. So generous, Beta." I smiled with all my teeth. "I'm right where I need to be," I said. Anne watched confusion flicker in her eyes. Mrs. Patel turned out to be a small woman with steely hair and sharp eyes who wore pearls like a weapon. "And you are?" she asked me after greeting my parents and cooing over Keon Noor. I said, "Keon's sister." I waited for her to say useful, but she didn't. "Accounting student." She asked as if she'd read a file. "Good. Musicians need people who understand money." "Some of us are both," Elisa piped up from the piano bench, surprising me. "Noor is also a historian of her own house." Mrs. Patel's eyes turned to me with a new brightness. "Historian." "Just a person with a good filing system," I said, deflecting, but my heart put a small black dot beside her name. "An ally, maybe?" When everyone had a glass and enough samosa to not complain, Dad clinked a fork against a glass. "Thank you for coming," he said in his warm, public voice. "We're so proud of Keon and so grateful for friends who believe in his journey. He'll play a little for you, and then if you're moved to give well, the hat will go around." He laughed. The crowd laughed with him. Keon played. He was good. I can admit that even now. The room went hush in the way strangers get quiet for pretty things. He finished and bent like a reed, and the clapping filled the house like a storm of hands. Mom wiped her eyes. Auntie whispered, "Our golden boy," like a prayer. While the applause was still spilling into the foyer, someone knocked on the door. Dad made his apologetic face and opened it. A man in a navy windbreaker stood on the stoop, holding a clipboard. "Evening," he said, glancing past Dad into the hall. "Sorry to interrupt. I'm with Tri-County Thrift Coop. I'm here for a desk." Dad blinked. Deer in headlights, pure. Now, the man checked his sheet. Rescheduled drop. Desk, oak. Pickup 2 of 2. Name Con. He smiled in that practiced sorry dash I dash don single quotes T dash right dash the dash schedule way. Shouldn't take a minute. My heart thumped so hard I felt it in my wrists. The desk. My desk. The one that hid my blue folder like a secret heartbeat. Behind me, Auntie hissed, delighted, oh ho! Selling furniture the same night as fundraising. Double income. A few guests tittered. Eliza stood, half rising from the piano bench, eyes on me. I felt the world tilt. I hadn't planned this. But here was Chance again, dressed in a navy windbreaker. "Bring it through," Dad said, already ushering the man up the stairs so quickly I thought he might dislocate a shoulder. "Don't be angry. Please don't be angry." Sat on his face like a mask. The room swelled with that awkward chatter people do when something heavy is being carried through a party. Two men in matching windbreakers emerged from my old room, guiding the desk like a stretcher. "Careful with the doorway," Mom fluttered. "It's tight." The desk bumped the frame, grazing the paint. I stepped closer without thinking, the way you move toward a child about to fall. The top drawer, the one with the label MISC, slid an inch. The room felt like it leaned. "Wait," I said, and my voice carried in a way that startled everyone, including me. Conversations stopped. The house stilled. The desk, for once, did not. Dad looked at me. "Nor," he said softly, a warning and a plea wrapped together. I walked to the desk and put my hand on the drawer. The men paused, blinking at me, waiting for instructions like I was a person whose words counted. "Open this," I said to no one in particular. The mover glanced at Dad. Dad's mouth opened and closed. Mom said, "Beta, not now." Auntie murmured, drama in a delighted way that made me want to roll the desk over her toes. I pulled the drawer myself. It stuttered and then slid. The inside looked like a little stage everyone was waiting to see the actors walk onto. The stapler sat like a small bronze animal. The passports peered like shy birds. And there, tucked flat, like a sleeping thing, lay the blue folder. Not in my suitcase where I'd hidden it for safety, because last night, superstitious or exhausted, I had slid it back into its place. As if the desk and the folder had a marriage I didn't want to disrupt. I lifted the folder. The room let out a sound I can only describe as a collective inhale. Mrs. Patel leaned in, curious, not nosy. Keon shifted the bow of his violin, catching the lamplight like a blade. Eliza's eyes glinted, calm as a harbor light. "What is that?" Auntie asked, unable to stop herself. I turned the folder so the label faced the room. House papers, the letters looked like they were written for this exact audience. I could have made a scene then. I could have waved the papers like a judge's gavel and pronounced sentences. But the humiliation at Auntie's had taught me something else too. The crowd loves a mess, but they respect a demonstration. So I pulled the writer out with deliberate hands, like someone laying down a card they didn't need to win, only to reveal. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is a recorded occupancy and use covenant tied to a deed of trust on this house. It's been on the title for 13 years. It reserves the southwest bedroom for me exclusively until I'm 30 or I sign a waiver. It says no one can rent or occupy it without my written consent." Silence dropped like a curtain. You could hear the desk breathe. Mom's face went sheet white. Dad made a small strangled sound. Auntie said in a whisper that didn't know how to whisper, "What?" I continued because this was a performance now, and I was finally playing my instrument. It also says that if the covenant is violated, the lender or their successor can call the loan due and start foreclosure proceedings. For Auntie squeaked, "Proceedings." Someone else echoed, a donor clutching his wine. Mrs. Patel stepped forward, professional interest sharpening her features. "Is that recorded?" she asked as if we were comparing recipes. "Yes," I said, handing her the copy with the recorder's stamp. "Here's the assignment to the successor beneficiary recorded 2 years later." Successor beneficiary. Dad repeated, like he was struggling to translate. Who would that even be? I looked at him. I didn't savor it. I just said the truth like numbers read out on a page. The room didn't gasp. It exhaled. People looked at each other the way audiences do when a plot falls into place. Keon took a step toward me and then back, as if the floor had changed texture. Eliza closed the piano lid gently, the sound a soft, respectful clack. Mrs. Patel skimmed, nodded once. Anne handed the papers back with the solemnity of a judge returning exhibits. "Well," she said into the air, almost to herself, "that's not nothing." Dad found his voice. "Why didn't you tell us?" He asked me, broken and furious and bewildered all at once. It's the way people get when the house they thought they lived in turns out to have a hidden staircase. My laugh came out thin. "Why didn't you ask?" I said, "Why did you rent out my room while calling it temporary? Why did you sell my dresser and almost this desk without thinking to wonder if the one person who keeps track of our papers might have a paper that mattered?" Mom's hand flew to her mouth. We forgot," she whispered. "Your grandmother, she made us sign so many things. I thought it was just legalese." "It was legalese," I said, more gently than I felt. "The kind that means what it says." Keon looked between us, panic dawning. "What does this mean? Nura, are you going to?" "Don't do anything to the house, please. This is our home." "Our home," I echoed. "The one where you rented my bed to a stranger and laughed about it at a party. The one where my existence is a punchline. This is our home, and it has names, and one of those names is mine." The mover, bless him, cleared his throat. "So, do you still want the desk?" he asked into the thick air. "No," I said. "We're keeping the desk." He nodded, relieved. I'll get a signature saying we didn't complete the pickup." He vanished down the stairs like a man escaping a weather event. Auntie, who lives to be at the center of anything, blurted, "You wouldn't, nor Beta. You wouldn't actually, what was that word, foreclose? On your own parents." I turned to her. "I don't want to foreclose on anyone," I said. "I want what the papers say I have. Exclusive use of my room, and a say in whether it gets rented. I want to be asked, not told. I want the dignity of not being traded for a plane ticket to Vienna." No one laughed. No one dared. Mrs. Patel cleared her throat delicately. "If I may," she said, and people instinctively made space the way they do when a violinist raises a bow. "This is an unfortunate timing conflict for a party, but not, perhaps, a tragedy. The covenant is binding. The solution is simple. Honor it." Dad bristled. "We can't give back the money." "You can return the deposit," she said, more brisk than unkind, "or negotiate a different arrangement with the consent of the person whose name is on the covenant." She looked at me when she said person, and I felt the word attached to me like a medal. Eliza, suddenly very small and very present in the corner, stood. "I can move out," she said softly. "I never wanted to be." This, I shook my head. "You did nothing wrong," I said. "We'll make sure you have time and help. But starting now, not one more night in that room." Keon flinched like I'd slapped him. Dad opened his mouth to argue. Mom's eyes filled with tears. Not of manipulation this time, but the kind that come when a person realizes they have lost track of a line that mattered. I tucked the writer back into the blue folder. I didn't wave it. I didn't pound the desk. I just held it against my chest, the way I used to hold Keon's hand on the way across busy streets. The party didn't exactly end. It drained. Donors murmured apologies and good nights. Auntie gathered her jalebi with a speed that would have been funny another day. Mrs. Patel pressed a card into my hand with a look that meant, "Call me if you need a referee." The room thinned out until it was just the four of us, plus Eliza understanding that privacy was a courtesy she could give and taking it. Dad sank into a chair and rubbed his face. Mom sat beside him, their shoulders touching like they used to when I was little, and they were still a team against the world. Keon stood, useless and beautiful, his hands opening and closing. A boy who had never had to learn how to hold on and let go at the same time. "Noor," Mom said finally, her voice the size of a thread. "What? What do you want?" I looked at her. At Dad, at Keon, at the house that had been shifting under my feet and had, tonight, spoken its truest name through paper and ink. "I want my room back," I said, and felt how simple and enormous the sentence was. I want the dresser returned or replaced with one I choose. I want an apology, a real one, not the kind you put sugar on. I want to decide with you how we're going to pay for Keon's trip in a way that doesn't treat me like a pawn. I swallowed. And I want you to know I could have ruined everything tonight, and I didn't. Not because I'm weak. Because I love this house. Because Grandma taught me to hold power like a teacup, firmly, carefully, without spilling. Keon made a sound I have never heard him make. It was half sob, half exhale. I'm sorry, he said, suddenly small. Nor, I'm Gadim, sorry. I never think about what anything costs if someone else is paying. That, I said, is the problem. Dad started to speak, then stopped. The words he finally found were not elegant. I forgot, he said hoarsely, about the papers. About you. He looked at me like a man kneeling beside something he had broken beyond superglue. Your grandmother. She told us we'd thank her later for making us sign, and I laughed. I'm not laughing. Thank God for your details. Mom reached for my hand. My heart, she said. We have been wrong. It wasn't enough. It also was the only beginning that could exist. I stood there, the blue folder warm against me. The room still smelling faintly of samosas and apology. And I realized the thread I'd tugged hadn't just unraveled something. It had revealed the pattern underneath. The covenant wasn't a trap. It was a promise. Not a weapon, but a boundary. And boundaries are the kind of love we don't know how to name until we've lived without them. I nodded once like a conductor to an orchestra at the start of a piece. Tomorrow, I said, because timing is power. First thing, Dad echoed, and for the first time in a long time, he sounded like someone ready to listen. I carried the blue folder back to the front room and set it on the twin bed that had been my island. I didn't sleep right away. I sat there and watched the house settle, as if it had been holding its breath for 13 years and had finally exhaled. In the morning, we'd pull furniture. We'd move boxes. We'd call the thrift coop and reverse invoices. We'd call Eliza's cousin with a spare room across town. We'd call Mrs. Patel, maybe, to make sure the language we used in the agreement reflected the reality of the paper that had always been there. But for now, in that tender space after revelation and before consequence, I let my hand rest on the folder's cover and whispered, "Thank you, Grandma," to the air that still remembered her name. Outside, the plum tree clicked its branches against the window. The night moved around our house like a tide. Somewhere far away, a boy practiced his scales in a room that belonged to him. In our house, for the first time in a long time, a room remembered who it was for. And I, in the front room that had made me small, felt something unspool inside me that was not humiliation, not anger, but a kind of quiet readiness that tasted like metal and mint. Morning would come. And with it, just as morning didn't so much arrive as take off its shoes and stand in our hallway. I didn't sleep. I counted the seconds between the house's breaths. At 7 on the dot, I knocked on my parents' door like a meter reader. No apology in the knock. No pleading. Just a sound that meant we have business. Dad opened in a t-shirt, hair sticking up like the static of a bad decision. Mom sat on the edge of the bed, already dressed, palms flat on her knees. Keon had fallen asleep on the couch downstairs, violin case as his pillow. Like that would ward off consequence. I could still smell last night. Saffron, samosa oil, the sharp citrus of shock. "Kitchen," I said. They followed. No one spoke. Sunlight came through the blinds and ladders. I put the blue folder on the table and placed a legal pad next to it. I had borrowed it from the library ages ago to write budgets on. Today, it felt like a gavel. "We're going to do this like professionals," I said. "Not as people who only know how to say sorry when we're caught." Mom's eyes watered. "We are sorry," she whispered. "I know," I said. "You'll say it later to me. But now we're going to do sorry." Dad's mouth opened, ready to defend, then closed. Maybe he heard his own voice from last night, tinny and unprepared. He sat, I sat. We waited for the third person who mattered in this decision. Keon appeared in the doorway, hair flattened on one side, second-hand shame making him look younger. "Do I?" He started. "Yes," I said. Sit, he did. I slid the legal pad to the center. We're drafting a memorandum of understanding. I am not a lawyer, but I can write plain English. Mrs. Patel said she'd look it over later. Dad flinched at the name another adult in our story. Good. I wrote the date. My hand was steady. When I'm angry, I shake. When I'm certain, I don't. Memorandum of Understanding 427 Linden Ave. Point 1. I said aloud as I wrote. The southwest bedroom what the covenant calls the reserved room returns to my exclusive use today. Eliza will be given notice and assistance to move, and she will not pay for the month she spent in that room because she paid for something you had no right to sell her. Mom reached for her tea mug like it was a railing on a ship. We can't afford to refund. You can, I said. You will? And since she did not cause this, you will cover movers from your own accounts. If you don't have it, you'll sell things that belong to the people who made this choice. 2 pairs of eyes slid to Keon. He swallowed. Yeah, take my limited edition sneakers. And the gaming PC and the AirPods Max. I can survive with the old pair. Dad blinked. Those were birthday gifts. They were luxuries, Keon said, voice small but strong. So was Vienna. I wrote it down, Keon, to liquidate personal luxury items to fund refunds. It felt petty to write it like that. And also perfect. Point 2, I continued. The dresser and bed frame you sold, you'll call Tri-County Thrift Coop right after this and buy them back. Plus, they're trouble. If they're gone, you'll replace them with items of equivalent quality selected by me, not something flimsy with good lighting. Dad winced. I think the dresser might already be on their floor. Then get in the car, I said. Now I looked at the clock. They open at 9. We'll be there at 9-0-5. He nodded. Point 3, I said. Expenses for Keon's tours are not going to be extracted from my existence. If he goes, it will be on money we can see and name. No behind-the-back sales, no temporary repurposing of my life. He will earn and fundraise, and if the number isn't met by the deadline, he doesn't go. Keon opened his mouth. I waited for the argument about dreams, about once in a lifetime, about acoustics. Instead, he rubbed his face and said, What can I do? I didn't let relief soften me. Not yet. 3 things, I said, ticking them off. 1. You'll busk every evening this week at the farmer's market. Sign with a QR code. Help send the guy who almost lost his sister's room to Vienna. Be honest. 2. You'll teach beginner lessons to Auntie Semena's twins for half price. They've been asking. You keep dodging. No more. 3. You'll call your department and ask if there are emergency travel funds or work-study shifts in the performance hall. The answer might be no. You will accept no with gratitude. He nodded, color rising in his cheeks. Okay. Point 4, I said, and... My voice went softer without my permission. Apologies. Real ones. It's to me. To Eliza, not by text. Not sorry if you felt. The kind that uses we and did. Mom choked. We will. Dad's hand found hers under the table and gripped like a person who'd been falling. Point 5, I said. Public correction. Auntie Hina made my humiliation a group activity. You will make the truth one too. Dad's eyes narrowed. Dragging family into family dragged me, I said. The memory of that laughter in Auntie's living room, like vinegar in my mouth. You invited the neighborhood to watch me be a doormat. You can invite them to watch me stand up. How? Mom whispered. The simplest way, I said. Friday is community night at the conservatory. They let students perform and families mingle. You'll come on stage after Keon's piece. You'll say what you did. You'll say what stopped you. You'll say my name without a joke attached. And you'll say publicly that the room is mine. Silence. It was a long one. The house listened. Then Dad nodded, once like a man agreeing to pay a debt, finally seeing the number on paper. Okay. I slid the legal pad to him. Sin, he blinked. Just like that. Just like that. He signed. Mom signed. I signed not because I needed to, but because it felt right that my handwriting bookended theirs. Keon touched the pen and then pulled his hand back. Should I? This isn't your contract, I said. But you'll keep a copy. We took pictures with our phones. I slipped the original into the blue folder. The sound of paper sliding against plastic was more satisfying than any applause I'd ever heard from my brother. It sounded like a lock closing on a door that had been ajar for too long. Eat something, I said, and buttered toast while everyone sat like they'd survived a small earthquake. At 9:02, we were in the car. Dad drove. I sat in the back with the blue folder like a passenger that required a seatbelt. Mom stared out the window, her face drawn in the way faces get when the map of their child has changed overnight. Keon rode his bike, trailing us, insisting on paying for the gas with the last cash in his wallet at the station because he felt like he needed to do something immediate that hurt. Tri-County Thrift Coop lives in a squat building painted the color landlords call stone and everyone else calls grief. Inside, it smells like dust, orange cleaner, and other people's decisions. The clerk looked up, recognized Dad, and tried for pleasant. We need the oak dresser we sold last week, Dad said, breathless, like he'd jogged. And the bed frame. We'll pay the restock fee. The clerk name tag, Tawny consulted the computer. Bed frames still in back. Dresser sold yesterday. My stomach dropped. To whom? I asked before Dad could launch into an argument. Tawny peered. Receipt says Patel. She frowned, then smiled. Mrs. Patel, the patron saint of our antique section. I exhaled a laugh through my nose. Of course. Can we call her? Mom asked, voice small. Do you know her? Tawny shrugged. She's in here every week. Likes wood that's got a story. Does she know she just bought ours? I muttered. Tawny lifted the phone under the counter like a magician revealing a dove. Do you want me to try? I nodded. She dialed from memory. Hi, Mrs. P. Tawny at Tri-County? I've got a family here. The Cons, that dresser you picked up yesterday, they desperately need it back. She listened, eyebrows rising. You did. Oh, I see. She covered the mouthpiece. She says she bought it because she heard at the party what was happening, and she thought, well, she'll tell you. She handed the phone to me. Mrs. Patel, I said. Child, she said without preface, voice like a cello string. I figured your father would be here when the doors opened. It's in my guest room for now, covered with a sheet. You can pick it up this afternoon. I'll tell the Coop you're the buyer of record with the surcharge, so their books are clean. I closed my eyes. Thank you. Don't thank me, she said crisply. I like wood with stories, not wood stained with shame. A pause, softer. And I like girls who read writers. Her words warmed places in me I hadn't realized were cold. We'll be there at 3. We wheeled the bed frame out, paid the surcharge like an offering, and loaded it into the car with the ridiculous ritual of men trying to show they could have avoided all this by being strong. Back home, we carried it upstairs. The room looked both naked and relieved. I stood in the doorway and felt tears prick my eyes, not because of tragedy now, but because we were stepping into repair. Keon, I said. He straightened. You're moving Eliza's boxes to the hall. I'll pack them with her. He nodded. I'll call her. Not a text, I repeated. He winced. Right? Eliza arrived with her tote in a tight mouth she tried to relax when she saw me. I'm so sorry, she said before stepping inside. You don't owe me that, I said. But I owe you movers and boxes and time. She glanced at my parents, who hovered like chastened teenagers. I know a place with a room, she said. My colleague's roommate is leaving. I can move tonight if we start now. We'll start now, Mom said, and for the first time in days. Her voice sounded like my mother's instead of a woman trying on a cheerful mask that didn't fit. We packed together. Eliza and I folded her clothes into neat piles, the kind that show a person was raised by someone who taught them corners matter. Mom wrapped her plant in newspaper with the care of a midwife. Dad unhooked the fairy lights, my lights, with slow hands, handing them to me without comment. I wound them around my forearm and felt like I was rolling up a vein to donate blood. I finally knew I could keep. At noon, Lena arrived with tape and the grin of someone prepared to commit crimes for you. "Tell me who to glare at," she said. "No glaring," I said. "Just lifting." We lifted. We laughed a little, the nervous way people giggle when stepping onto a bridge that looks flimsy but holds. Keon hauled boxes without making a single pun. At 2:45, Dad and I drove to Mrs. Patel's, where the dresser sat under a sheet like a patient under a thin blanket. "Come in," she said, and poured tea like she'd been waiting all day to censure and comfort us. I told Eliza to call me if anyone tried to make her feel like the villain in this. "No one will," I said. Mrs. Patel looked at me over the rim of her cup. "You have the rider with you?" I tapped the folder at my hip. "Good," she sipped. "Bring it Friday night. Some people think truth is gossip unless it's on a stage." Dad flushed. We're going to speak." "You are?" she said dryly, in declarative sentences. We wrestled the dresser into the car. On the drive home, Dad cleared his throat. "She always scared me a little," he admitted. "She scares everyone a little," I said. "That's why people behave around her." He glanced at me in the mirror. "I didn't behave around you." "No," I said, not unkindly. "You didn't." We slid the dresser back into its old spot as if guided by grooves worn into the floor. It fit. Of course it did. Some things remember where they belong, even when we forget. I ran my fingers along the nick shaped like a J and felt the tremor of 1,000 moments I thought were gone. At 4, Elisa's movers arrived. We loaded the truck. Mom handed her a small box of pastries tied with twine, the humble language she speaks when words feel too big. Eliza hugged me at the gate. "You handled this like a lawyer and a sister," she said. "Both are rarer than they should be." "Thank you for not hating me for living in your house," I said. "I hated systems," she said. "Not people. And this wasn't a system. It was a lesson everyone had to learn the hard way." When the truck pulled away, I stood in the doorway of my room and let the emptiness of it wash over me. Not empty as in hollow, empty as in ready. The bed frame waited. The sea glass walls held their breath. The fairy lights coiled in my hand felt like a promise. "Help me." I asked Keon. He lifted the mattress heavier than it looked, tan for the first time in months. We worked in silence that wasn't avoidance. We built the bed, screwed the frame with the little Allen wrench. Dad keeps taped inside a kitchen drawer because someday it'll matter. Someday was here. Lena anchored the string lights with tiny, clear tape, like a jeweler setting stones. My desk still home, still oak slid against the wall under the window. I opened the top drawer. The blue folder slid into place the way the dresser had, an object recognizing its coordinates. "Thank you," I said to the room. It looked back at me, quietly smug. Keon brushed his fingers along the light string. "Nor," he said, hesitant. "I meant what I said. I'm sorry, feels small, but I'm pouring it out anyway." His voice broke. "I can withdraw from Vienna." The sentence landed like a bird on a branch that might bear it. "You can," I said. "But maybe you don't have to if you change what going costs." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "Make the trip answer to the house instead of making the house answer to the trip." I pointed at the violin case. "You said the farmer's market." "Do it. Put your pride in the hat with the cash. I'll make donor cards with QR codes. Eliza has coworkers who love to overpay for culture. Mrs. Patel will post once. And you'll have strangers crying on your table. If you don't make it, you don't go. If you do, you go knowing you didn't step on me to board the plane." He nodded, tears shining and not falling. "Okay, we ate dinner on our laps because..." The table felt like a courtroom, and everyone needed a less official place to put their hands. Mom made dal that tasted like the first time you feel forgiven by a god you didn't know you believed in. Dad put his phone face down. Keon practiced quietly after, not to impress the street, but to respect it. Friday came like a drumbeat. All week, Keon stood at the farmer's market under a sun-faded umbrella with his violin case open and a handwritten sign. "Fund my tour, but not at my sister's expense." People stopped. People asked. People gave. The QR code beeped like a tiny bird each time. He came home pink from sun and soft from humility. The number climbed. Not 5,000. Not yet. But enough for a person to feel the difference between being carried and walking. At the conservatory. Community. Night Stage is a simple platform with a black curtain and the humility of a public school auditorium that got lucky. Aunties in their good shawls, toddlers with fruit pouches, teenagers with nerves. Dads in polos that tried, they all filled the seats. I spotted Auntie Heina in the second row, lips pursed the way she pins fabric. Mrs. Patel sat aisle, arms crossed like a gate. Eliza slid into a seat next to Lena and squeezed my hand on the way by. Backstage, Keon tuned. His hands didn't shake. He looked at me. If I cry, he whispered, keep playing. I don't have an instrument, I said. You're my metronome, he said, and I laughed despite myself. He went on. He chose a piece that didn't show off so much as confess something slow and aching that made toddlers go quiet and aunties sigh. He didn't milk it. He didn't wink. He just finished and bowed like a boy who knew the difference between talent and permission. The applause rose and fell. He stepped back. The MC started toward the mic with the instinct to keep things moving. I stepped forward first. Hi, I said, and my voice filled the room in a way even I hadn't expected. I'm Noor. The room quieted the way rooms do when something about to matter is happening. I could see Auntie's eyebrows arch. I could see Dad's throat work. Mom's hands were clasped like she was praying for a version of her daughter who wouldn't make trouble. I'm Keon's sister, I continued. And he's wonderful. I let that line breathe. But our house forgot he isn't the only wonderful person in it. A rough, honest little laugh rippled along the front row's people who've been there. I held up a paper, not the writer, not yet. The M.O. Last week, our family made a decision about money that treated me like furniture. We rented out my room, my actual room, to fund his tour. A few gasps. A few knowing nods. And then we laughed about it at a party. Auntie stared at her hands. Good, I felt small, I said. Then I opened a blue folder my grandmother left me and remembered the one detail everyone else forgot. My name is on the house. Not as owner, as boundary. I pointed toward the back where Mrs. Patel sat, and she lifted a hand in acknowledgement. There's a covenant recorded with our deed that reserves my room by direction, by name until I turn 30. It's not a loophole. It's a promise someone made to me when I was too young to know I'd need it. I didn't waive the rider. I didn't make anyone read legalese on a Friday night. I just held the paper so it flashed white and real. On Sunday, I said, we almost sold my desk. On Monday, we wrote this. I lifted the M.O. My parents apologized to me. They refunded Eliza. They bought back the dresser. My brother sold his toys and stood in the sun asking strangers for help. And tonight, we're not pretending. We're telling the truth because the truth is how you repair a house. I stepped back. Dad stepped forward, unexpected and trembling. He took the mic as if it were heavier than a socket wrench. I'm Armand, he said. I'm the father who forgot to ask his daughter a question no parent should forget. My wife and I, he looked at Mom and she stood beside him. We broke something by thinking a good reason makes a wrong thing right. It doesn't. He turned to me. Nor, he said into the mic, which made my name ring from the stage rafters like a bell. We are sorry. Not because we got caught. Because we treated you like a resource instead of a person. We called it temporary. We called it family. It was theft. The room made a sound I haven't heard often. Approval without spectacle. The kind that happens when people see someone admit the thing they died to keep secret. Mom spoke into the mic too, voice thin and sure at the same time. My heart, she said to me, and the room. I am sorry. I forgot the names Grandma insisted we learn. I asked everyone to clap for one child and forgot that the other child was holding the building up. She reached for my hand and I let her take it. We'll do the work. Keon stepped up, Mike in his turn like a relay. I thought Vienna had to happen or my life would be less. I forgot my sister's life isn't a variable in my equation. He looked at the crowd. If you want to help me go, I'd be grateful. If you don't, I'll still play. Because she's the reason I have a room to practice in. He pointed at the QR sign propped discreetly near the stage. People laughed a good laugh. Lena whooped. Auntie dabbed at her eyes theatrically, and for once, I didn't mind the theater. Mrs. Patel stood up in the aisle like a jury foreman. I'll match the first 500 that comes in tonight, she said, not smiling. On one condition, that young lady, she pointed at me, buys herself a lock for that desk. Done, I said, before anyone else could speak. The MC, bless her chaos management soul, stepped in with the upbeat energy of someone who refuses to let catharsis derail a schedule. Thank you to the Khan family for modeling something other than perfection. Next up, we have Aisha on cello. The night resumed. People came up to us between pieces and said things I didn't expect to hear outside a therapist's office. We did that to our eldest. My sister still doesn't speak to me. Thank you for saying it. Auntie sashayed up, scrubbed my cheek with the back of her knuckles, and said, I was unkind. She looked wrecked. I like a story too much. I forgot the person inside it. Forgive me, Beta. On probation, I said, and she laughed in a way that had more humility in it than spice. By the end of the night, the QR code had pinged itself hoarse. Not 5,000. But the gap had become a bridge people wanted to help lay planks across. Keon counted quietly backstage, folded the bills like contrition, and handed the stack to me. House treasurer, he said. House historian, I corrected, and put the money in an envelope with both labels. At home, we carried the last box into my room. The dresser glowed in the lamplight like small victory. The bed looked like rest instead of concession. The string lights hummed a low, warm song. I set the blue folder in the top drawer and closed it. The sound it made felt like the end of one story's music and the beginning of another. We didn't toast with champagne. We didn't take a family selfie with a corny caption. We did something better. We cleaned up. Mom wiped counters. Dad tightened the loose banister screw he'd been promising to fix since spring. Keon took the trash out without being asked. I labeled a new file, Boundaries House, and slid the photocopied Mo inside. Later, lying in my bed in my room with my door closed, I stared up at the sea glass ceiling and thought, justice isn't fireworks. It's a lock that works. It's your name on the right line. Grandma hadn't left me money. She'd left me an instrument that didn't make sound, only shape. She'd known before I did that in our house. Love would need a notarized edge. My phone buzzed. A message from Eliza, safely moved. Colleague is nice. Plant survived. Proud of you. Also, your brother just posted a clip from the market. Comments are wholesome. Don't let it go to his head. Another buzz. Lena, I'm writing your TED Talk title. Useful people don't disappear. And then, astonishingly, a message from Auntie Hein. Neighborhood WhatsApp. I told them I was wrong. I laughed into my pillow until the laugh turned into something like a sob and then back into laugh again. My room absorbed it, as rooms do when they remember their person. Down the hall, my parents' voices murmured. Not frantic. Not plotting. Just talking. Making a plan that included me because paper had made that inclusion non-negotiable. I pulled the quilt grandma's quilt up to my chin. The tiny fan-shaped pieces overlapped. Someone had once told me the pattern was called wedding ring. I didn't need the metaphor tonight. I just needed the weight. Before sleep, I got out of bed and, on an impulse, opened the desk drawer one more time. The blue folder lay there, modest, a small ocean. I slipped a new page into it. Our signed Mo, with a sticky note in my handwriting that said, "We remembered." Then I locked the drawer with the tiny key Mrs. Patel had pressed into my palm on our way out of her house. House, I said softly, feeling ridiculous and holy. You know my name. The window answered with the sound of the plum tree tapping the glass like a friend who lives next door. Justice done, not loudly, but thoroughly. Boundaries drawn, not as a moat, but as a doorway. And me, not furniture. Not useful like a tool you can be more than useful without becoming useless me. Nor in my room, in my life, ready to sleep. Tomorrow, there would still be bills. There would still be Vienna, maybe. Or maybe there would be a different summer with busking and cupcakes and new humility. But nothing would be paid for with my erasure again. That was the price no one in this house could afford anymore. People like to say every storm leaves behind a rainbow. That's a lie. Some storms leave broken fences, muddy floors, and the ache of knowing you should have moved the car before the tree came down. But sometimes, if you've been lucky, or careful, or just stubborn enough, storms leave behind clarity. The air feels washed. The sky looks truer. That was what I woke up to after the night of the community concert, after justice had been spoken out loud under stage lights. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Not the suffocating quiet of resentment. Not the tense quiet of things unsaid, but the soft, ordinary kind, where a house breathes in rhythm again. The front room where I'd been exiled for weeks stood empty, boxes cleared, air light. My room, the reserved room, held me again, not as a guest, but as its rightful keeper. The dresser stood in its place, carrying my folded sweaters like it had been waiting. The string lights twinkled faintly in the morning sun, defiant against daylight. As if to say, "You won this round, Nor?" Downstairs, Mom was already in the kitchen. She wasn't humming to disguise worry. She was humming because she was content. The difference was subtle, but I heard it. She looked up when I walked in. "Chai, yes," I said. She poured me a cup before pouring her own, a tiny shift in ritual that said more than an essay of apologies. Dad was at the table, sorting through bills with a calculator by his elbow. His shoulders weren't slumped the way they had been. He looked up at me. "I called the cop this morning," he said. "The receipt for the dresser has been corrected. It's officially ours again." He pushed a sheet of paper toward me. A fresh file number. A new receipt. He was showing me not just words, but proof, because he knew now that I lived in details, and respect meant meeting me there. I smiled, small and real. "Good." Keon stumbled in, hair sticking up, yawning. He set his violin case on the chair before even sitting down, like a knight laying down his sword at the table. "Mark it again today," he said. "I already printed new flyers." Dad raised his eyebrows. "Already?" Keon shrugged. "People like the QR code. And Mrs. Patel messaged, Mashi wants me to play at a charity brunch. She said she'd pay." He looked at me, sheepish. "I told her I'd only accept if she doubled the donation into the fund." For once, I didn't roll my eyes. "Good," I said again, and meant it. Later that day, Keon knocked on my door. "My door. Can I come in?" "Yeah." He stood awkwardly at the edge of the rug, holding a takeout cup. "I've got you coffee. The one you like. Extra cinnamon." I raised an eyebrow. "Bribery." "Reparation," he said, and then quieter, "apology." He set the cup on my desk, cleared his throat, and started without theatrics. "I'm sorry, Noor. Not the cheap kind of sorry. The real one. I treated your life like small change. I let them sell your room like it was a pawn shop trinket. I should have stopped it. I should have fought for you the way you've always fought for me. And I didn't." His voice cracked. "I was selfish. I thought the world owed me a trip to Vienna. It doesn't. You don't." I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let him sit in it. It was the silence I had sat in for years, waiting for recognition. Finally, I said, "Thank you. I needed to hear that. I'll earn Vienna or I won't go. But either way, I'll never step on you to get there again." That was when the tightness in my chest loosened. Forgiveness isn't a door you fling open. It's a window you crack and see if the air smells safe. This smelled safe. By the end of the week, word had traveled. Auntie Hina, the same one who'd laughed loudest at my expense, called me. "Noor Beta," she said, her voice unusually soft. "I told the women's circle everything. I told them we mocked you without knowing the truth. I said I was ashamed. They listened. They respected." She paused. "They said you were brave." For once, her gossip didn't sting. It helped. My humiliation had been public. So was my justice. And maybe that was the balance Grandma had known I'd need. Private strength backed by public record. We didn't transform overnight into the perfect family. We still argued about groceries. Dad still left tools in the living room. Mom still overextended herself on bakery orders. Keon still had a way of believing applause meant the world was his. But something had changed. Boundaries had been drawn in ink, not pencil. I wasn't invisible anymore. When Dad planned repairs, he asked if I had time to look over the quotes. When Mom posted a listing for cakes, she asked if she could use my photos of the kitchen. When Keon set up a busking spot, he asked if I wanted to design the flyers. They had learned asking matters and me. I learned that justice doesn't arrive gift-wrapped. Sometimes it's hidden in a drawer in a folder labeled house papers, waiting for the moment you're ready to pull it out. I learned that love without boundaries is just a kind of erasure. I learned that my name nerd didn't just mean light. It meant presence. It meant permanence. The night before Kian left for his Torias, he raised enough in the end, through markets, lessons, and donors who liked the story of a boy who had to grow up fast. He came into my room. He sat on the floor, leaning against my dresser, violin case beside him. "Play something," I said. "Without the orchestra," he teased. "Without the orchestra," I said. He played softly, not a showpiece, just a tune he knew I liked. One he used to practice when I timed his scales as a teenager. It filled my room again, not as an invasion, but as a gift. For the first time, his music didn't drown me. It sat beside me, equal. When he finished, he said, "When I come back, will you help me make a real budget, so I don't keep making messes?" I smiled, of course. Because justice doesn't mean you stop caring. It just means you stop being erased. When I close my eyes and think of that chapter of my life, I don't see the laughter at Auntie's or the movers carrying my dresser down the stairs. I see the blue folder glowing under lamplight. I hear Grandma's voice in the margins. Houses, like people, should be known by their names. My family forgot my name for a while. But I remembered it. I claimed it. And I carved it into the walls of this house so no one would ever mistake me for furniture again. They sold my room to pay for my brother's vacation. But they forgot one detail. That room was never just a room. It was me. And I am not for sale. And that's how I took back my room, my dignity, and my name. If this story kept you hooked until the very end, don't forget justice like this deserves to be shared. Hit that like button if you believe no one should ever be treated as invisible. Tap, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss the next story of betrayal, revenge, and justice served. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if your family tried to sell your room? Because remember, sometimes the smallest detail changes everything.